Julius puts up a three. Yes! And
It's Bearcat Blitz. Ready to cap off your week and lead you into the weekend here on the Believe Network, where we are presented by Bet Online. And I'm your host, Russ Eltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer from Rivals Cincinnati site, thefrontofficenews.com. And of course, as I mentioned, we are brought to you by Bet Online. It's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC. Bet Online continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here as we have plenty to cover in this show. Another loss for the Cincinnati Bearcats, 62-59 to the West Virginia Mountaineers, putting a real dire pull on their chances to make the 2025 NCAA tournament. Just going to take an unheard of streak in this conference from this team to have any hope of making the big dance this season. Also an unfortunate update on Connor Hickman's status for the rest of the year. We'll get to that after we recap the 62-59 loss to West Virginia, which also included another guard injury to Simas Lukošius, was kind of clouded by a guard injury that happened last week. We discussed that on the first show this week of how difficult it was going to be for Cincinnati if they did not have Simas Lukošius to operate offensively. Well, that was a big foreshadowing by us with them not cracking 60 points without him, just not even really able to get through shoot around, not able to move his shoulder. Although Wes Miller did say after the game that Simas Lukošius does not have any defined big issues that came up on x-rays or ultrasounds or any of those kind of looks with the major technologies that they use to find those medical issues. Discuss that loss, and we will get to the TCU matchup, a game that Cincinnati should win, but is going up against a team that has played a lot better of late in TCU. They're 8-7 in the conference and have won 3 consecutive games, hoping to put a final dagger in the Bearcats season. What is really already likely over, but there's always that twinkling little bit of automatic bid hope if they can go on a run in the Big 12 tournament. Not holding our breath there, to say the least. He's Neil Meyer. I'm Russ Heltman. We'll get to that after these messages on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, the latest disappointment in the Wes Miller era, another game where they fall as a quad 1 opportunity. They're quickly approaching, Neil, 40 quad 1 losses in the Wes Miller era before they hit 10 quad 1 wins. I don't believe they actually have notched a quad 1 win at home. Obviously, this game was on the road, and the Bearcats completely just go puppy mode, peeing down their legs in the final 10 minutes. They had a 6-point lead and went 2 of 7 from the free throw line, went 0 for 3 in that sense in the final minutes. Dylan Mitchell just goes 0 for 2. They miss a front end of a 1-and-1. I believe that was Day Thomas who did that. They just completely crumbled in the final 9 minutes. It was made to look a lot better, and they actually pulled off a prayer cover on the betting line going into the game if you were able to get the Bearcats plus 3.5 with 2 just absolute launch threes in the final seconds by Dan Skillings Jr. to make his awful night once again look a little bit better with 10 points and 7 rebounds. But Jizzle James completely bottled up in this one. The 3-game hot streak with the jumper comes to a crashing close, 6 of 20 from the field, 1 of 8 from deep, and Day Thomas continues to be just lost with his jump shot, shooting around 34% from mid-range this year and 5 of 15 in this game, 3 of 6 from the field. Neil, those guys really the only options offensively, though, at this point in the season, with Connor Hickman on the men still and completely done for the season. We'll get to that in a few minutes. And Simas Lukošius, his status, who knows if he's going to be able to shoot up tomorrow in a quick turnaround against TCU. This team is in dire straits right now, and it was just another instance where Cincinnati could not close the job in the final minutes. They had a big lead, but ultimately couldn't get it done. And not a big lead, but just they took the lead with 6 minutes left in the game, and they just completely gave it up to West Virginia, who ultimately closed the door and kept their own NCAA tournament hopes alive.
Yeah, most certainly, Russ. And there's a lot to unpack from this game, too. Obviously, the significance of the Simas Lukošius injury is a lot more significant than people think, just in terms of what he brings to this table, brings to the table on the offensive end. I mean, clearly you saw Cincinnati was searching for anything and everything on the offensive end on Wednesday night. I mean, you look down between Jizzle James and Day Thomas, they go a combined 11 for 35, if I remember right. So, I mean, your two guards take literally 55% of your field goal attempts in that game. So those two guys had a lot on their plates heading into this one without the play of Simas Lukošius. And I think everybody kind of knew it was going to be Jizzle James, and who else was going to step up outside of them. They don't have that killer guy on the offensive end. We've seen Jizzle James take that realm over the last few weeks, but they don't have a killer on this team right now, Russ, where they can say, hey, go get me a bucket when I desperately need a bucket. And in this one, what happened? You get to the foul line near the end, and you miss the front end of the 1-and-1. But the biggest takeaway from this game, Russ, was without Simas Lukošius, which you and I talked about on the first episode, what was Cincinnati going to need to do to win this game? Drive the basketball and get to the foul line. What did they not do? Get to the foul line. Just 7 free throw attempts where they go 2 for 7 and you lose by 3. I mean, you did everything else right. You keep the turnovers under 10. You lose the rebounding margin, but that has been something that they have done all season. It is what it feels like, especially here in conference.
And it's unbelievable, Neil, that after they got destroyed against Iowa State, what did they go down 6 or 7 to 1 immediately on the boards in this game, following it up?
Yeah. So the biggest thing too, when you see that happen, is you're searching for something. Say, hey, how can we find some spark of momentum? Dan Skilling's having 7 rebounds is huge, especially after the last month and a half he has, but you still got to find the production on the offensive end. I mean, he gets the 2 circus threes at the end, but Cincinnati is searching for somebody to take over on the offensive end. And then now you're without Connor Hickman, who's been out since January 8th. You're now without Simas Lukošius, 2 of your better scorers on this team. Day Thomas is having to take a bigger role. Jizzle James is having to take more onto his plate over the recent weeks. They just don't have an assertive killer on this team where they can say, hey, go get me a bucket. I need it now. Get out of my way. Let me go do what I have to do to get points for this team. But on top of it, Russ, you mentioned it. From that 9-minute mark on, right? Jizzle James hits the 3. They take a 1-point lead, right? I think it was 49-48 with about 9:40 left. Cincinnati gets 3 points over the next 8 minutes after Day Thomas hits a 3 after what was it, 18-3 run by West Virginia over 8 minutes?
Yeah, 15-3 at least, but yeah, it might have been 18-3. It was bad, to say the least.
When you are struggling that bad and you can't get your offense going, what do we tell people, Russ? When your offense is struggling, find ways to get downhill and hunt contact. Get to the rim, put pressure on the rim, whatever you can do. And Cincinnati just failed to do that on Wednesday night is what it seemed like. They were settling for the mid-range jumpers, which some people would argue that's not Cincinnati's shot. But, I mean, overall, outside of Day Thomas and Jizzle James, Dylan Mitchell went 4 for 5, which was a good sight to see, or 5 for 8. Danton went 4 for 5, but you got to get more production there in the front court. You just have to. But if you're Cincinnati, you're going to have to find ways to win games that you haven't won all season, right? And that's winning them at the foul line. Free throw shooting has inadequately ruined Cincinnati's season, per se. They struggled majority of the start of conference play, and now look what happens. You lose a 3-point game on the road in a game where you only shoot 7 free throws. You got to do a lot of things better and find ways to change things up. Cincinnati has to find ways to get to the foul line, especially now. It's now or never, right? You're sitting 5-10 in conference play. When will they make that change and see, hey, we're not scoring on our offense. Let's try and change things up, attack, and try to beat teams from the foul line. Try to take the contact. I mean, they're free points, right? Essentially, if you can get to the foul line.
Not if you're UC, shooting 66% in conference play and 2 of 7 against West Virginia.
Not with Cincinnati, they're not free points. But most teams, especially in this conference, if their offensive is in a rut where they're 4 or 5 minutes without a field goal, what are they going to do, Russ? Attack the rim. It's just point being. And that's something Cincinnati has to do better at.
A team that's done it really well and really well recently is TCU, and we'll get to that in a minute, but they have averaged 24.7 free throws per game in this 3-game win streak. And that's really the only big way they can efficiently score as we await that preview. But Cincinnati, 66% from the line in conference play. That's 14th out of 16 teams. They're 15th out of 16 teams with 13.5 free throw attempts per game. And it's just brutal, man. Just brutal. I don't know where else you go from here. Down the stretch, you got TCU, Baylor, Houston, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. I think this team would be lucky to win 3, if not at most 4 games down the stretch here. And it's just the late game execution is not there. It hasn't been there at all season, and it hasn't been there really at all in the Wes Miller era consistently enough to win games in this league. And as you mentioned, Neil, they don't have a killer, consistent killer. Jizzle James can do it some points here and there, but he is not an efficient enough scorer at this point in his basketball career to consistently put up 16 to 18 points per game like this offense needs right now, because he shoots too many mid-range jump shots. He's taken 58 shots at the rim this season, Neil. And when you look at his free throw attempts, it's even worse. In his career last season, averaged 1.4 free throw attempts per game as a freshman. And Neil, you want to see what you know what he's bumped that up to? Shot that all the way up to 1.5 free throw attempts per game as a sophomore. It's just not good enough. You have to find ways to get to the rim, which he does efficiently score at the rim. He's over 64% on rim shots this season. It doesn't make sense to me why he doesn't get to the rim more often, why Day Thomas doesn't get to the rim more often, why they don't hunt contact more often. And the reason I'm pointing those players out is because, Neil, who else are you going to ask to score and do that? They don't have any other real ball handlers on this roster that you can consistently go to. You're not going to ask Dylan. You're not going to ask Dylan Mitchell to do that.
Especially with Connor Hickman banged up. You got Simas Lukošius now banged up. CJ Frederick is a guy whose minutes have significantly decreased. So, I mean,
he's been overall, nothing for over 2 years in college basketball. He hasn't really contributed anything. So, yeah, it's just it's a capped offense right now. And yes, Jizzle James is a great player, but there is so much more meat left on that bone for him to chew on. And just 1.5 free throw attempts per game. It just has to get better. And we'll see if a mentality change happens here in this next game. But also, Neil, on the flip side, to play devil's advocate to my point, 20 league games in this kind of schedule, with how little practice time they get, with how many minutes you're having to play these guys, and with Jizzle James still playing 24 minutes in this game, despite getting 4 fouls for, I think, the first time in his career in consecutive games. It's hard to rely on a guy to have a 28% usage rate and expect him to get to the line 5, 6, 7, 8 times a game and hit those shots consistently. It's pounding. It's physical. It's a tough league. We know that. And it's taken its massive toll on the Bearcats. We'll see if they end up switching this format to play a couple games in non-conference out of the 20 and then move to the more normal 18-game league schedule after January 1st, like it was last year. But it doesn't matter at this point for this season because it's almost too far gone. And I just 62-59, Neil, it's as predictable as it gets for this program right now. 21-5 now, I am predicting these games. If this team was 21-5, they'd be what, a top 4 seed, top 3 seed in the NCAA tournament?
Crazier about it, Russ? Look at Cincinnati's schedule from this season from start to bottom in the non-conference. Cincinnati is 10-0 when they score 80 or more points, which they have only done so twice in Big 12 play.
Right. And they're 1-7 as an underdog, 1-10 in quad 1 games this season under Wes Miller. It's just becoming painfully predictable with a few games left. 1-9 now in quad one games, 7-2 in quad two, as UCF has cratered out from a quad one victory, but BYU has jumped up to a quad one opportunity because they have now sitting at 30th overall in the net rankings. They are the last team possible that Cincinnati could hit in that range, because it's 1 to 30 games at home are your quad one opponents. So that was a good win. And Neil, I mean, that's really the only good win all season. Am I right? Was the win against BYU?
Yeah, no, right there with you, because I mean, you look down at Cincinnati's schedule from this season. I mean, you have the win versus Xavier. Everyone's going to talk about that in the non-conference, but Xavier's been mid this whole season. So on top of it,
team as you see, essentially.
Yeah, you have the win over Dayton and you have the win over Xavier. But outside of that, Cincinnati has, I mean, you look down, you barely squeak by Colorado 68-62, 67-60 versus Arizona State. Your BYU win and your UCF win, I mean, are your two best wins right now in conference play, and UCF has cratered over the recent weeks. So they have mightily struggled throughout conference play, because, I mean, they were right there in the Arizona State game. They were right there in the Kansas State game. They just failed to get over that hump and find ways to close games. But for Cincinnati right now, I mean, your 5 wins in Big 12 play have been over Colorado, who's at the bottom of the conference, UCF and Arizona State, who are at the bottom of the conference, Utah, who's middle of the pack, and BYU, who's, if they play like how they played the other night versus Kansas, they might be the best team in this conference, top to bottom, if they have that kind of performance again. But overall, that BYU is your only good quality win in Big 12 play. So if they want to have any kind of momentum here, Russ, to keep this season alive, it starts on Saturday. If not, you're going to have to, if something goes south on Saturday, their only shot is winning the Big 12 tournament. And more than likely, Russ, with a loss on Saturday, they'll be playing an 11:30 game out in Kansas City in 2 weeks.
And then you talk about just some other contributors on the team. Arrington Page comes back from his injury and plays just 3 minutes, no points, no stats, just has been a complete non-factor in conference play. Tyler Betsy, 2 of 6 from the field. He is a freshman, yes, but he's a freshman that is the highest touted recruit in the Wes Miller era. And Wes Miller pumped him up throughout the offseason, pumped him out throughout the non-conference slate as a player that would make a big difference. Got the opportunity with the game on the line in the final second, missed that shot wide open from outside. Rayvon Griffith, 2 minutes, -3 total, plus minus, giving you really nothing. And then Dan Skillings, man, it's just you had Victor Locken last year and Dan Skillings this year. It's inexplicable, Neil, what has happened to Dan Skillings. It really is inexplicable. Yes, the stat line looks better than it has in the last couple of weeks, but he made 2, 3, 4 massive bone-breaking mistakes, either on defense or the turnover, especially that over and back call, with the game hanging in the balance, to drive a stake in Cincinnati's chances to win this game against West Virginia. And he has just consistently been a problem for this roster, for this team trying to win games in the Big 12 slate.
Yeah, overall, I think this season definitely for Cincinnati, Russ, you look down on paper, it's not what they anticipated it to be, but I mean, think about how this season has gone. They were not far off at that opening stretch. I mean, if you were able to pull that game off versus Arizona, if you were able to find a way to contain that game right there, Russ, I mean, that builds you some momentum, especially heading into Baylor. But for me, Russ, what changed this season was the moment Arrington Page got hung on that dunk versus Kansas with the momentum to get that momentum surging versus Kansas. I think after that, that's when things kind of started going south.
Really tough. I've never felt more wrong about an outfit, but I have adjusted my projections, obviously, throughout the season, sitting at 21-5 with my predictions. And we'll see what I got to say about this next game coming up and what Neil has to say as well, plus an update on Connor Hickman after these messages on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, the TCU Horned Frog coming into Fifth Third Arena on Saturday afternoon, a rare noon tip for the Bearcats, a quick turnaround coming off of the later action against West Virginia on Wednesday night on the road. Won't have Connor Hickman obviously people can probably assume that, and they won't have him for the rest of the season, Neil, as Wes Miller confirmed on his 700 WOW radio show that Hickman had season-ending surgery on his foot earlier this week on Wednesday while the team was in Morgantown, and he was in Charlotte, North Carolina, getting that surgery done. Full quote from Miller during his show. He had surgery yesterday, actually. So while we were in Morgantown, he was down in Charlotte, North Carolina with Bob Anderson, one of the best foot doctors in the world. Anderson did the surgery yesterday, went really well. It turns out it was a lot worse once they went in than anybody had ever known. We came back literally from the Xavier game on. He was trying to play and practice on a broken foot. It was broken. I don't know if we diagnosed it correctly. We didn't make some major error, but I don't know if we knew the severity of it. So he probably tried to play through it. I think what Anderson said was he should have had the surgery back at the end of December. So I hope the NCAA, when they look at all that, does the right thing. But he deserves a year. He's a heck of a player. I think everybody saw that when he was helping. Just super unfortunate for Hickman, Neil, a guy that was going to be another one of your primary ball handlers, was going to be one of those guys that we just talked about that could get downhill, that could get to the free throw line, that could take some pressure off of some of the other players in this offense, and ends up averaging just 4.3 points and 2.5 rebounds in his first season, and hopefully not his last with the Bearcats, but appeared in 13 out of 31 games, Neil. And I believe you noted that he is just above the minutes cutoff for a full-on injury waiver to be given by the NCAA. We'll see if they give some leeway in this situation, but we kind of know how that goes with this organization.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And after digging into some stats, if I did the stats correctly, it looks like he's just about 29 to 30 minutes above that minute restriction for the medical waiver. But if NCAA does the right thing, I mean, look at what the kid went through. I mean, he fought the last month, Russ.
What a warrior, man. Took crap from all over the fan base of like ripping on him for not playing well enough. Well, what do you know? He had a broken foot. That's probably going to hinder your ability to play.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, he was a guy who was going to come in and make an immediate impact for this team. I mean, Russ, we are hearing rumblings out of the summer workouts that this could be a guy who comes in and starts. But
Right.
Wes Miller has noted he's got 7 or 8 of those guys on this team who were able to come in and start. Connor Hickman was one of those guys expected to come in and be a huge force for this team. And you could clearly saw what happened when he was fully healthy. The Xavier game is a prime example because when things weren't going right versus Xavier, who stepped up? Connor Hickman, a guy who has never played in a crosstown shootout before. I believe he finished with 14 points in that game, if I remember right. Russ, I mean, he was just everywhere. Defense brought a lot of effort. His offensive scoring ability, his three-point shooting that everybody knows about. But
9 points for Hickman and with 3 rebounds. But yeah, a big impact for sure.
Yeah, but that was the impact they needed from him out of that game. But he's someone they're desperately missing, especially to kind of take the load off of guys like Day Thomas and Jizzle James. So overall, that guard backcourt, Russ, that we talked about 6 months ago, that said this might be the deepest backcourt for Cincinnati, has dwindled over the last few weeks with Simas Lukošius getting hurt, Connor Hickman out for the season. It's now relying on Jizzle James and Day Thomas to play essentially 25 to 30 minutes a game. Think about that.
And teams are targeting Jizzle James on the defensive end. They're going at him, trying to get him in foul trouble, as we've seen over the past few games. Jizzle only able to play 24 minutes because he had 2 fouls early in the first half against West Virginia and barely missed out on fouling out for the second straight time, which would have been the only 2 times in his career that he's fouled out. So it's an obvious weak point for the Bearcats right now as they go up against a TCU Horned Frogs team that is surging, won 3 in a row. They enter this game ranked 82nd on KenPom and 72nd in the net rankings, while Cincinnati is 47th in the net and 54th on KenPom, ahead of a noon tip on ESPN2 at home. Bart Torvik giving the Bearcats a strong chance to win this one, 71% favorites with a projected score of 66-61 UC, and what's definitely, I would say, especially if Simas Lukošius can't go, going to be a defensive rock fight similar to the one we saw against West Virginia. You see 6-1 against the Horned Frogs since the 1949 season. And Neil, when we look at the offensive storyline, they can't get caught. UC cannot get caught shooting mid-range jump shots at will and settling for those shots consistently like they did against West Virginia. You have to find a way to get to the line and get to the rim. If you're Jizzle James, Day Thomas, all of these other players, it shouldn't be massively difficult going up against a TCU team that is, yes, good on defense, but has really, really struggled at the rim. They're allowing teams to shoot 60.1% on close twos and 95% on dunk attempts this season, only allowing 41.6% on all other 2-point shots and 33.6% from deep, which is a place that UC could also hit them with if they can get to the paint and kick out some passes against one of the worst assist defenses in the country. They're allowing 17.9 assists per game in conference play. Overall in the season, I believe they're in the top 25 worst defenses against assists this season. So a big opportunity for Jizzle James and Day Thomas to put their mark on this game. It's not going to be super easy, though, and they're going to have to do it timely and efficiently against the defense that's still only allowing 0.984 points per possession. That's 65th nationally, and they play at a very slow pace, just like Cincinnati. So expect a lot of half-court offense in this one up against the 220th ranked team in adjusted tempo in the TCU Horned Frogs. Neil, only one player of 6'6" or taller on this roster, rotation-wise, for TCU, and Ernest Uday, who is their best defensive player, 6.9 points, 1.3 blocks per game for the 6'11" center, and boasts a 95 defensive rating, which is by far the best on TCU's rotation right now. Got to find a way to get to the rim, and you may not be able to get free throws because we know UC hasn't been able to do that all year, but you have to find shots at the rim. You have to get into the paint and then maybe kick the ball out to some open shooters and spam that mediocre to not so great 3-point defense out of TCU.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to mention too, Russ, in this one. The biggest thing I'm worried about in this matchup for Cincinnati is TCU's ability to rebound. I think Ernst Uda Jr. could be a huge problem for Cincinnati in this matchup just because of how well he rebounds the basketball. I mean, 6'11", a very, very physical guy down there in the front court, and Cincinnati has struggled rebounding the basketball lately and dealing with a guy like Ernst Uda. He's going to give Cincinnati problems. I mean, he was kind of
not only 6'11", Neil, but 250 as well. Yeah, that's not a great thing for a guy giving up 25 pounds in Aziz Bandego at the same size.
Right. And I think that's going to be the difference maker here in this one, Russ, because you look down, I believe he's averaging just about 8 and 8 on the season. And when you look at that, I mean, obviously you want more in the points category for your big guy down there in the front court, but 8 rebounds versus a TCU team who is very experienced. I mean, it's a complete roster rebuild for TCU last year. I mean, they were another team that was projected to finish near the bottom of the conference in Big 12 because they lived in the transfer portal this season. We heard former coaches across other conferences this year say, oh, well, I lost my whole team to the transfer portal. Simply, that is what happened to Jamie Dixon a season ago. They lose everybody out of the transfer portal, right? So then they have to rebuild a whole team, and look what happened. They're building a 3-game winning streak at the right time, coming off a top 10 victory versus Texas Tech at home. It could be difficult for Cincinnati on Saturday, but the biggest thing to take away about this TCU team, Russ, is they are awful on the road this year. I mean, you look down at their schedule, they are horrendous on the road, because if you look at it, I believe they are, I'm pulling it up right now. So you look down at the schedule for this year, TCU, they have currently
on the road, they're 2-6 on the road.
Yep, 2-6 on the road.
0-3 in neutral sites as well.
And 13-2 at home. But let's talk about their losses on the road, right? You scroll down, they lose 90-81 to Arizona. You get blown out by 20 by Houston on the road at the Fertitta Center. You look down, you get beat by Utah at home. That was their one loss. You lose to Kansas at home, but you get blown out by 30 to UCF on the road. I mean, think about that. That is an awful UCF team. You lose on the road to Texas Tech, which was expected. That's a very good Texas Tech team. And then you lose by 30 to Iowa State in Ames. You barely squeak by Arizona State in Arizona. So, I mean, you look down, like, they are horrendous on the road, Russ. Like, every Big 12 game that they have lost on the road essentially has been by 20 or more points.
Mm-hmm.
So
it is tough sledding for the Horned Frogs when they hit that airplane.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're Cincinnati, you love to see that kind of aspect and know this team really struggles on the road. But, Russ, you remember the 2 battles with TCU last year, right? Because both of them came down to overtime, very physical. John Newman and Micah Peavy get into it. Jamie Dixon was not happy with how things ended last time. There's going to be a build up to this game. There's going to be some animosity for those who were on the team last year. It's going to be a physical game come Saturday, and Cincinnati just simply cannot come out lackadaisical. If they come out lackadaisical, Russ, it could be the coffin nails on any NCAA tournament hopes. Because if you find yourselves down at home early to TCU on a day where you get your first noon game in front of fans in a while, they're going to let you hear it. And that's the last thing that Wes Miller and the Bearcats want on Saturday.
TCU's offense, 182nd nationally in offensive rating. They average just 65 points per game, 65.1 to be exact. That's second worst in the Big 12. They're just really not good offensively. And if they aren't getting to the free throw line, which UC has not allowed much to happen this year, except for the Iowa State game, then I just don't see how TCU is going to score enough in this game, especially in a road environment, to get the win. They just have one player shooting over 34% from deep. That's their lead guard, Noah Reynolds, who leads the team with 12.9 points per game. He's one of only two players averaging over 8.5 points per game. So if they are able to get past the 70 point mark here, it's going to be, that's just an unexplicable happening. They cannot let that happen. If you're UC, they're 34.8% on long twos this season. That is unbelievably bad. Like, that is so bad. And they're shooting 30.7% from deep. So UC, just pack the paint, let them shoot those jumpers, win the rebounding battle in that sense with you closer to the basket, and don't foul here like you haven't fouled much all season. They're, as I mentioned earlier in the show, 24.7 free throws per game in this 3-game win streak. I would be shocked if Cincinnati allows them to hit the line 16 or 17 times, let alone 24 times. So a Cincinnati team that is only allowing 15 free throw attempts per game, that's the best in the Big 12. I just don't see the matchup working out well enough for TCU to get a win here, despite the Bearcats' doldrums that they're in right now. Give me UC to win a rock fight, 65-62. What do you got, Neil?
Yeah, I got it being a low-scoring game, but the thing is, Russ, if Simas Lukošius is unable to go, I'm taking TCU. That's going to be the difference maker. And
I almost did that, Neil, in my prediction, in my article, but I was like, I can't cop out and just do a Bearcats win if Simas plays and Bearcats lose if they don't. So I'm going to lean the Bearcats, but we're on the same wavelength there.
But for me, unfortunately, with how things are trending for Cincinnati, TCU, like I said earlier, is playing their best ball this season, right? They're coming off a monumental win versus a top 10 team in the country who, just as well as Cincinnati, looking to keep their NCAA tournament hopes alive. I'm going with the Horned Frogs 68-64. I don't think this game either team scores above 70 points on Saturday.
Both predict on a rock fight, and on the opposite ends of the winning ledger. Again, on this show, we'll see who is correct when we reconvene on the early portion of next week on the latest edition of Bearcat Blitz. That wraps us up here on the Believe Network. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three.